Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to this briefing. I want to acknowledge before we get started that I recognize this is a really busy day in the Senate, and that there are a lot of people who feel really passionately about things that are happening a couple of floors below us. And so we want to thank you for being here, and we want to let you know that we're going to really be focused on education, and we do appreciate everybody that has come here to join us to talk about Title II and its impact on professional learning and then on students. So we have a great program planned today, and we are excited because we have a panel that is going to bring you collectively a real demonstration of the value and the importance of professional learning. Through impact data and stories, Learning Forward's Executive Director, Stephanie Hirsh, and our panelists will demonstrate that the Every Student Succeeds Act's new definition of professional development and Congress's and the President's continued investments in Title II of ESSA are paying significant dividends for our schools, our teachers, and most importantly, our students. Before moving into our planned program, I really want to, on behalf of Learning Forward, extend our thanks to both the Senate and the House on behalf of thousands of Learning Forward educator members for passing the Defense, Labor, HHS, and Education mini omnibus bill because it provides level funding, $2.05 billion for Title II. This money is the only direct source of federal funding for K-12 professional learning, and states and school districts nationwide have relied on it for decades. We are pleased that this bill is on its way to the President, and we thank all of the members of Congress from both sides of the aisle who worked together to make this possible. My job is just to kick off this session with a few notes about the program. So first, the agenda. As you see, in just a moment, you're going to hear from Heather Harding of the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation. The Schusterman Foundation understands the importance of job-embedded professional learning for all teachers and has made this event possible today. We are then going to hear from Stephanie Hirsh, the Executive Director of Learning Forward. Stephanie will help to frame the national landscape around this important program, and in particular, point to the large-scale research studies that provide evidence of the positive impact of professional learning. And finally, we will have a panel moderated by Learning Forward's President, Alan Ingram. Alan is joined by incredible practitioners from the state, district, and local level who have all brought evidence about the importance of Title II and the impact that the funds are having in their local contexts. We are excited to have both a full house in this room and also many viewers online who are watching the live stream of this event. So welcome to everybody. I want to encourage you to engage in the conversation around these important topics using Twitter and Facebook. So please tag @LearningForward in your messages and use the hashtag Title2A so that we can join in the conversation with you. And finally, some thank yous. On behalf of Learning Forward, we want to extend a special thank you to Senator Lamar Alexander and his staff in helping us to secure this room. It's a beautiful room. We're really excited to be here, and for helping with the event's logistics. And we want to thank the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation for making this event possible through their support of Learning Forward and belief in the critical importance of Title II. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce Heather Harding, the Director of Policy and Public Understanding at the Schusterman Foundation. Heather has been with the foundation for a short time, but she has been active in critical education issues for her whole career. Currently at Schusterman, and just prior to that with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She has also served as the founding executive director of a research practice partnership at the George Washington University, worked in senior management roles at Teach for America, and was a classroom teacher. Heather, we are so glad you could be here today.
Well, good afternoon. The Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation is very pleased and excited to support Learning Forward and really excited about the bill. and hoping that it gets signed despite the fact that we're here on what is sure to be a historic day in the Senate and a difficult one for our country. And while all those issues are important, the issue of how to support educators in their professional learning is equally important, because the job of teaching is infinitely complex. It wraps up every emotion as well as every instance of hard work to ensure that our nation's children have a quality instruction. So we're really excited about this panel and about the work that we'll all work together to do. One of the things that I just want to quickly say about this focus on professional learning is that at the Schusterman Foundation, we have a little motto, and the motto is that we heart teachers. And I think, by securing the Title II dollars and really trying to work hard to make professional development sexy again, it's a way of expressing how much we heart teachers. The work of teachers is challenging, it's difficult, and I said it earlier, it's complex. And I think the more that we can help everyone understand what that work entails, and how important it is to stay on top of the cutting edge research, evidence, and practices. But you have to do that in your job. You can't do that in the summer. You can't do that after 6, after spending several hours grading papers. And so we think it's really important that we figure out ways to support folks in learning while they are doing their job. So with that, I will step off the soapbox and introduce Stephanie. Stephanie Hirsh, of course, has spent the last 30 years leading Learning Forward. And it's a great honor to introduce you and also to acknowledge the level of commitment that you've given to the organization and to the field. Stephanie also was a secondary teacher in Richardson, Texas, and a former school board member. So I will bring you up and look forward to hearing from the panel. Thanks so much.
Good afternoon. I'd like to begin by adding my appreciation to the Schusterman Family Foundation and for the support for today, and look forward to working with Heather as our new program officer. And I'd like to thank our partner, Bernstein Strategy Group. John, where are you? I know you were in the room. I guess he stepped for a second. Okay. And the incredible panelists who you'll have the opportunity to hear from today. I would also like to add my thank you to everyone who's in the room. Thank you for joining us today, and for those of you who are online. I am truly excited about today, excited about the opportunity to share with you the positive impact Title II investments are having in professional learning and the impact those dollars are having on our schools, our educators, and our students. I know this is a question on everyone's mind, and I look forward to highlighting the changes we are seeing in teaching as a result of Title II. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with Learning Forward, but I must say I'm glad to see so many Learning Forward members in the room. That was incredibly exciting, in that people actually flew here to spend this hour and a half with us, and we're just tremendously honored by that. We are a nonprofit education organization with a multifaceted approach to achieving our vision, equity and excellence in teaching and learning. We are a membership association serving almost 10,000 dues-paying individuals, 20,000 plus chapter members in 40 plus states, and another 30,000 publication subscribers. We are a technical assistance provider working alongside and supporting SEAs and school district employees in school systems more than 500 days a year. And we are an advocacy organization publishing white papers and convening events like this to guide the field on important issues. Hopefully this slide is familiar to many of you in the room. For more than 2 decades, Learning Forward has championed professional learning standards so that professional learning will be held to the same expectations that we hold for student standards, teaching standards, and leadership standards. The standards define the essential conditions and elements that underlie professional learning that delivers on its intended outcomes. And the failure to attend to any of the standards compromises the impact of the investment. Today, more than 35 states have adopted or adapted the standards into policy. And earlier this week, I was in Florida, where the SEA was rolling out their revised standards based on our standards, and then indicators for measuring the implementation of the standards in school systems. You know, we began working with Senator Reid more than actually 2 decades ago, and this is how I can time it. I remember the first time he contacted me, he sent the information came on a roll fax machine. So that tells you how long ago we began this conversation. And even at that time, he recognized a need for a change in the definition of PD in the law. So we are absolutely pleased with the new definition in ESSA. It actually operationalizes the standards into language that describes what effective professional learning looks like for teachers. The new definition reinforces that professional learning that impacts educator practice and student outcomes is first and foremost based on data that we have about our students and our teachers. It is collaboratively planned and executed, preferably among a team of teachers who share collective responsibility for a group of students. It's intensive, it's intentional, and it's sustained. It's not an adult pull-out program. And it's job embedded. As Heather said, it occurs within the school day, and it's focused on precisely what teachers are trying to make happen in the classroom. Now, with this new definition, we have been incredibly purposeful in asking our stakeholders to expect that their professional learning lives up to this new definition. And it's working. The standards combined with the new definition are providing the foundation for a profound shift in professional learning. And while many school systems, as you will hear from among those represented today, have invested in these shifts, for some, it hasn't happened. We acknowledge that. And we need our leaders to continue to call upon them to accelerate their efforts. We need less PD driven by educator preference and more PD informed by data. We need to replace one-shot workshops. In fact, we shouldn't see any anymore, with more ongoing collaborative learning. We need to eliminate training without follow-up because that is malpractice in our field. And we need more coaching and mentoring and collaborative problem solving. And we need to eliminate asking people, how was it? And instead collecting evidence of impact from professional learning on improvements in teachers' practice and student outcomes. And how do we know these shifts are taking place? Documenting the impact of professional learning is challenging because we're talking about changes in human behavior. For example, how many of you have ever started a new diet or a new exercise routine and never achieved the results you were intending? Or how many of you have tried to get a toddler or a teenager to change their behavior? The point of raising these examples is to recognize that changing human behavior is challenging, and it takes time, and it takes ongoing efforts. And fortunately, we know that effective professional learning can support and sustain long-term behavior change. And contrary to what you read in the papers or what you may have heard when cases are made for eliminating Title II funding, there is considerable evidence today, including several large-scale studies supporting the fact that effective professional learning has a positive impact on teaching practice and student learning. And so we hope the information I'm about to highlight increases your confidence in this invaluable federal investment. So I'm going to just focus on 4 different kinds of professional learning, and I'm going to share with you the evidence today, the evidence that people have been asking for decades. We have it, and we have no excuse now to ignore it. So let's talk about the evidence about coaching. According to SCA reports, 63% of the Title II dollars are used to support coaching in schools. Coaching can be incredibly powerful. However, like most programs and interventions that have an evidence base, there's a right way and a wrong way to implement it. And that is why we have seen some studies that report that coaching didn't have any impact in this particular instance. Learning. A 2018 meta-analysis examined 60 rigorous studies of the impact of coaching, and it found large positive effects on teachers' instructional practices. And within those 60 studies, there were 43 where researchers found that coaching accelerates the growth that typically occurs as one moves from a novice to an experienced teacher. Another way of saying that is coaching helps teachers get better faster. You will hear shortly from Pat Jones, an instructional coach in Washington, about the impact of her work on early literacy in her school district. Okay, let's talk about the evidence related to collaborative learning structures. Collaborative learning structures may be more familiar to some of you in the room by the language of PLC, professional learning communities, action research teams, lesson study, and more. Title II dollars are used to support this form of professional learning through training for team leaders, for supporting time, for stipends for team leaders, and other materials to support the work. This is an incredibly popular form of professional learning among teachers. But the question has to be, does it work? And fortunately, again, we have growing body of evidence indicating that indeed it does. Multiple researchers have documented that teachers who collaborate in PLCs to continuously improve their practice and their students' learning experience have a measurable positive impact. And just one example cited here was from a New York study that documented huge 4th and 5th grade student achievement gains when teachers engaged in purposeful, content-focused, collaborative learning and problem solving. What I like best about PLCs are they are often the catalyst for a more collaborative school culture where teachers share the collective responsibility for all the students in a grade level or a subject matter, and as a result, no child's fate is determined by the number over the classroom door they are assigned on the first day. We are pleased to have Chad Sutton from North Kansas City Schools here to speak about the impact of collaborative learning communities in his district. The evidence: content-focused professional learning and instructional materials. There is growing agreement that the quality of the materials teachers use impacts the quality of instruction, and therefore the materials they use in their professional learning are equally important. There is evidence that merely improving the quality of the materials that we provide teachers can improve the results even without the professional learning. But you add the professional learning on top of it, and then you even accelerate to higher results. You know, this issue has been defined as the equity imperative for our lowest performing schools, as well as typically underserved population. And in April, Learning Forward released a white paper on the intersection of high-quality professional learning and instructional materials if you're interested in digging deeper and going into the research to support this area. The evidence: leadership development. Through its investment in leadership research, the Wallace Foundation has helped us to understand that the principal is second only to the teacher among school factors that have an impact on student learning. With increasing as well as ever-changing expectations for school performance, the importance of professional learning, specifically for principals, has increased. Fortunately, ESSA allows states and LEAs to think deliberately about what principals need to lead great schools and when solid programs are put in place to get those amazing results. A recent 2017 meta-analysis of professional learning for principals found evidence of positive impact on student outcomes as a result of sustained year-long professional learning. It also reported that professional learning for principals contributed to lower teacher turnover, which leads to increased school sustainability and improved outcomes all around. Unfortunately, the report found that too few principals have access to high-quality professional learning. Paul Fleming, an assistant commissioner from Tennessee, will share how their Title II investments in leadership development are having impact across the state. Hopefully, these studies and more we can provide are compelling and convincing. So you heard I spent 30 years on this subject. And for those 30 years, everybody has asked, where's the evidence? And this was my opportunity today to say, we can no longer argue that the evidence doesn't exist. The challenge is not establishing the evidence. The challenge is making sure we use that evidence regularly to implement what we know works in schools. So, with that, I'm delighted now to turn the podium over to Alan Ingram to lead our panel discussion. Alan, as you heard, is Learning Forward's president and a great advocate for professional learning. Most recently, he served as Deputy Commissioner for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Previously, Alan served as a superintendent for public schools in Springfield, Massachusetts. And he also served in a variety of executive leadership roles in Oklahoma City Public Schools. Alan is a 2007 Broad Superintendent Academy Fellow. And one of the things I like best about Alan is that he's married to Lisa, a national board certified teacher. And they make their home in Midwest City, Oklahoma.
Thank you, Stephanie. And thank all of you for being here today. It is indeed a pleasure to facilitate the conversation with our panelists. And as Stephanie said, I think the most important thing for you to know is that my experiences are unique. I'm a native of Oklahoma, but I have a unique perspective about the strength of Title II funding and how it brings to bear opportunities for the education workforce. I would just mention one example with respect to my time in Massachusetts, where Title II funds were critical at the state and district level. And one specific example was in building scalable resources like the Standards Navigation Tool, which is a web-based interface that makes Massachusetts learning standards and related resources available to educators in dynamic and flexible ways. And so it's just an opportunity to spread knowledge and give people access to the resources that they need to do their jobs better. But more importantly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the state of affairs in terms of Title II in the context of Oklahoma and education in Oklahoma. I'm not sure, but many of you may be aware that educator funding and education funding in general in Oklahoma has been under intense scrutiny, especially in the last several months. Combined state and local funds per pupil is down by more than 10% in our state, and school districts are having to make significant cuts. Class sizes are growing considerably. Many teachers have lost their planning time during the school day to cover classes, and the list goes on. New teachers in Oklahoma are paid among the lowest salaries in the nation, and teachers are leaving the profession in Oklahoma school systems in record numbers. Emergency teacher certifications in Oklahoma are at an all-time high due to unfilled teaching positions across the state, from just 32 in 2011-12 school year to well over 1,900 in the 2017-18 school year. And in April, we had a statewide teacher strike. So the state of affairs is challenging, to say the least. But Title II in particular, Oklahoma receives approximately $24 million in Title II funds annually. These are critical dollars to address both the recruitment and retention issues that I addressed and described above. When I knew that I was coming to Washington today, I had an opportunity to reach out to a few folks that are involved in the professional learning effort in Oklahoma. And one was Susie Smith. She is the Learning Forward Oklahoma president for the affiliate, a new affiliate, I might add. And Susie has also been the former coordinator for professional learning for Bixby Public Schools in Bixby, Oklahoma. Susie described that in Bixby, they use Title II dollars to meet the district's goal of providing focused, needs-based, and data-informed professional learning through district and site-based activities. But she also talked about the teacher induction and mentoring programs that grew from the use of Title II funds, allowing for instructional coaching and support for new and career teachers. Bixby now performs among the top public schools in Oklahoma and continues to strategically utilize professional learning communities to address student learning. In addition to Susie, I had the chance to hear from Beth Fritsch, who is the Executive Director of Staff Development, Student Achievement, and Norman Pierce, and also support for Professional Learning Institute training. But most importantly, she said that without the Title II funding, that they would not be able to exist in terms of the outreach and the capacity building efforts for Norman Public Schools. But more importantly, today we have a great panel, so it's not just hearing from me, and it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists to you today. I'd like to start with Paul Fleming, and for those of you who thought you were going to get Commissioner McQueen, that is not Commissioner McQueen. But Paul is a great friend and serves as the Assistant Commissioner for Teachers and Leaders Division at the Tennessee Department of Education. This division, under Paul's leadership, is responsible for the design, implementation, evaluation, and support of policies, practices, and programs related to teacher and leader preparation institutions, licensure, evaluation, and development, and educator talent. In particular, Paul leads the Tennessee Transformational Leadership Alliance to foster innovative principal pipeline models across the state, and we're going to hear a little bit more about that today. Paul has been a high school principal and adjunct faculty member at Vanderbilt, and just like to thank you, Paul, for filling in today for Candace, and look forward to hearing from you as well. So let's welcome Paul. A round of applause. And we're also pleased to have Chad Sutton. Chad is the Assistant Superintendent for K-12 Academics and Accountability in North Kansas City School District, located in Kansas City, Missouri. North Kansas City Schools serves over 20,000 students in the greater Kansas City metropolitan area and is the third most diverse school district in the state. Dr. Sutton has 19 years of experience serving in the Missouri public school system. He has held the positions of a classroom teacher, assistant coach, assistant principal, principal, deputy director for elementary education, and now assistant superintendent. I also understand that Chad's contributions are in order, or want to recognize his contributions. Dr. Sutton was brought to Learning Forward's attention by our Learning Forward Missouri affiliate, who shared with us that North Kansas City received the Commissioner's Award for Best Practices in Professional Learning in March of 2018. And Dr. Sutton was awarded the Instructional Leadership Award as part of the work in their district. So welcome, Chad, and a round of applause. And then finally today, would want to introduce you to Pat Jones. Pat is a National Board Certified teacher. High five, Pat. Yep. Yeah, and Lisa's the same, and Renew. But a teacher serving as an instructional coach and learning assistance program coordinator at Woodland Primary School in Woodland, Washington. She has over 3 decades of teacher leadership experience, having taught across every subject and every grade level, including alternative high school and advanced placement. She really understands effective professional learning, having been an instructional coach at all school levels in large and small districts in multiple states. She also has served on various state and regional groups, most recently on the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction panel to review the menu of best practices, and as an Educational Services District Early Literacy Leader. And she is the newly appointed board member for Learning Forward Washington. So thank you for your service, and welcome, Pat. And now let's get our panel underway. And just a reminder for our panelists, if you would, make sure you press talk and speak into the microphone for the benefit of our viewing audience. Each panelist will be giving approximately a 5-minute overview to talk about the use of Title II funds in their area. And I think the first question, and perhaps, Chad, we'll start with you and go down the line. But if your senator wanted to come and see professional learning in action, what would you want to show them? What are you most proud of? What do you think would have the most profound impact? So if you had the opportunity, Chad, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. And if I had senators that came to visit North Kansas City schools, I think one of the things that they would see is that our teachers spend a significant amount of time collaborating and looking at individual student data to make decisions. Our teachers really, really care deeply about our kids. And one of the most important things that we can provide our teachers is time, and collaborative time to come together, to look at data, and to be able to make decisions, but also to share strategies and ideas. Our teachers are really, really smart and work really, really hard and care really deeply about kids. We just have to provide them with the time and the resources necessary to have the conversations, to be a part of action research teams when they can try out different strategies and models and use different resources with our students so that they can make good decisions. And so if a senator showed up in North Kansas City, I'd love for them to see how committed our teachers are to learning and growing so that they can best meet the individual needs for our students.
Yeah, well, again, thank you, Alan, and great to be here, and Stephanie and Learning Forward and all of you to talk about the importance of professional learning. I'm biased, being a former high school principal, around the importance of leadership, but believe in the intrinsic value and the importance of school leadership going forward. So I think coming to Tennessee, they would see a shift happening. You know, we know the role of the principal has changed significantly. It used to be the 3 Bs, right? Kind of books, boilers, and buses, and that was your job to do that. And we now know there's a real shift to shared instructional leadership, especially because we know teachers, the biggest reason they stay in the classroom, pay, yes, is important, working conditions are important. It's the perception of the leader in the building. And so this shift towards shared leadership really is why it's so important to have Title II funds for professional learning, because principals now have a significantly different role than they had 5 or even 10 years ago. And so in Tennessee, you'll see this shift happening around the role of the leader, especially because feedback now to teachers is so much more important, to give differentiated, kind of specialized feedback to teachers. That often was not the case in the past. And that's now on the shoulders of principals to provide that. And that's why it's so key for professional learning for leaders, and that's often through Title II. So in Tennessee, we have about 70% of our districts are rural, and they are dependent upon funding, especially federal funding like Title II, to really drive the professional learning of their leaders, especially in really isolated areas. And I think we all come from states where you have those areas, and that's also a really driving force for this change that we're currently in. And I'll talk a little bit, I think, as we go through about some specifics, but I just wanted to highlight that shift from kind of manager of a principal to now shared instructional leader is so key for now the continued professional learning of all leaders. And that's what we're seeing in Tennessee.
Thanks, Paul.
So Senator Murray came to visit our school. She would be coming to one of 295 school districts in the state of Washington who are similar to us in that we serve 2,500 students. So most school districts in the state of Washington, sorry.
There you go.
All right.
Yeah, now you're on.
Now I'm
Start
on.
over.
We'll start over. So if Senator Murray came to visit, she'd be coming to visit a small rural school. We serve 2,500 students, and we have alternative learning options, and we have 5 brick-and-mortar schools, which includes a very remote 40-student school and a recently constructed 912 high school that graduated its 108th class in June. Our senator would see that our teachers are deeply and intentionally engaged in collaborative learning. They would see us questioning genuinely, so what, how, why, and why not, They would hear us using references all the time to the Washington State Learning Standards, and they would see us holding data in our hands so that we can genuinely know that we are getting better in our practice. They'd see smiling children, and they would see happy adults. We've worked very hard in our community to establish a learning community where it is the norm to risk and to grow and to change. So it would be a joy to have a senator come and visit. I would have one caution, though. The senator better be ready to put on many, many hats, because as you probably know, in a small school district, as an instructional coach or as a teacher, we all wear many, many hats.
Thank you. So I just got a note handed to me, and would like to ask each of you to give an overview of the use of Title II funds in your local context. So, Chad, start with you.
Sure. So a couple of other things that I would like to add about North Kansas City, and I believe you have this handout, is that we also have over 125 languages that are spoken. So we're a very, very diverse school district, and also home of the very best barbecue, of course, in the country, and the 3-0 Kansas City Chiefs. So just got to get that in there whenever I have that opportunity. But to tell you a little bit about the problem that we were trying to solve with Title II is that in North Kansas City for a number of years, we had some really stagnant literacy achievement scores, and based on our state assessment, the MAP assessment. And there were years where we'd be performing right under where the state was with proficiency levels. There'd be years where we would be performing right at, and there were years sometimes when we got lucky and we were performing a little bit above the state. But then over time, as we peeled back the layers, we saw that we were not doing a very good job of meeting the needs of all students, in particular, those students from poverty and also our ELL students. And so in order to solve the problem, what we did is we designed literacy-based professional learning communities in North Kansas City, in which we allowed and supported our teachers with two primary resources. One was time. Our teachers need time to collaborate, and also providing them with opportunities to work with professional consultants or experts in the field. And all of this, almost all of this, was fueled by Title II dollars. So we allowed them to come together over a period of a couple of years, and then over time, their work evolved into a district-wide literacy model in terms of all of our teachers and all of our 21 schools at the time were implementing common practices across all of our elementary schools. And it took about a few years, similar to what Stephanie said, is sometimes this work and the changes that you see in student achievement just don't happen overnight. But when you stick to it and you align your practices to research, significant differences can happen. And I have some evidence of that to share with you here today. In 2010, before we began this work, like I talked about, we were performing very similar to what the overall state was. But after a few years of this work on behalf of our teachers and our principals, we saw some significant changes. And we saw over a period of time our students in poverty that were performing significantly below the state now, over a period of a few years, perform better than the overall state. And I'm not comparing the students in poverty in the state of Missouri to students in poverty in North Kansas City. I'm comparing the overall state of Missouri proficiency rates and the proficiency rates of students in poverty in North Kansas City. And for the first time ever, our students of poverty now are outperforming the state in terms of proficiency rates on our state assessment. The most significant change that we saw was with our ELL student population. And so what we saw with them, and on the graph, you can see that they were significantly underperforming in terms of their performance on our state assessment. And a lot of people would look at that and assume that, of course, your ELL students that are just learning the language and are acquiring the language, they are going to underperform the state because most of the rest of the state, that's their first language, is English. However, through our work, through our collaboration with our ELL teachers and our classroom teachers, we saw some significant differences and changes. And so now our ELL population in 2017, that population of students in grades 3, 4, and 5 outperformed the overall state in terms of proficiency rates. And so students in North Kansas City that are learning the English language, are taking a test in their second language, are outperforming students whose first language is English. And this is a result of high-quality professional development. It's a result of utilizing Title II dollars in a way that aligns to research. And we are so fortunate to be able to do that. And as we think about the impact, if we didn't have Title II dollars, so much of this would not be possible for us to be able to make happen for our students. And as I think about Title II and one of the sole purposes, which is to improve the quality of our teachers, that I am a very strong believer that the quality of our educational system here in the United States will never exceed the quality of our teachers. And so Title II funds are all about increasing the quality of our classroom teachers. And when we can do that, we can see the kinds of results that we've seen in North Kansas City.
Thanks, Chad. Paul, context, Title II funds, Tennessee.
Yeah, thank you. And similar to a colleague here, on the teacher side, on the leader side, very similar challenges. So in Tennessee, we, as I mentioned, have a significant number of rural districts. We have 1,800 schools. We have, therefore, 1,800 principals, and we turn over about 200 a year, that we need 200 new principals. So the scale is pretty manageable and pretty doable, but a lot of our districts need help with support, training, and development. They're also not always having access to principal preparation programs in the state. So in late 2015, under our state strategic plan and our leadership of Commissioner McQueen, put a real emphasis on leadership, and I was fortunate to lead the work on our Tennessee Transformational Leadership Alliance. This is a vision around a statewide incubator to develop principal pipeline models across the state. Now, the timing was great because this was right before ESSA, and so when the 3% set aside for Title II came along, we were really poised to take advantage of that with this Tennessee Transformational Alliance. In other words, we are now using that 3% dedicated Title II funding to fund the training of 190 aspiring leaders. So we're almost at that 200 mark that I mentioned each year in Tennessee, using evidence-based strategies for them to be trained, developed, supported at the local level. So these 9 regional models that are under the umbrella of our alliance have the power and the funding to train based on local needs, local district needs. We call it almost, growing your own, when those leaders, those aspiring leaders, are coming from the district in which they work, and to develop them into transformational leaders to lead work in Tennessee. Now, this is vitally necessary because even 10 years ago, we were at the bottom. I mean, we were nationally in a lot of rankings. We even had what's called an honesty gap, where we were saying in 2007, our students were like 90% proficient on our state assessments, but when we looked at our NAEP assessments, it was like 20%. So we really worked hard to close this honesty gap, and we put a lot of flags in the ground around leadership to drive those achievements. We're fortunate to be the fastest improving state in the country on NAEP assessments in 2013, 2017. And I think leadership has played a key role for the development of teacher training and PLCs, that shared leadership piece. But we're really excited about having this 3% Title II set aside for the express purpose of developing transformational principles. And like I said, these 9 models are all based on local needs. They're forced to collaborate. They're forced to have partnerships. So a typical model might be 2 or 3 districts coming together, sharing training in candidates, leader candidates, through this 4-year grant that we're using with Title II funds to place them into their districts as principals. So very dedicated focus and use of the 3% set aside available under Title II. And to do that, we're now in year 2, so we're seeing already really significant results in placement of these leaders in the first year, moving from an aspiring leader to a principal role. And I think more importantly, they're getting the training and the skills they need, because we are saying with the Alliance, you can only exist as a regional pipeline model if you're using national evidence-based strategies in order to drive your training forward. And I think that's a key difference, and Stephanie highlighted this from perhaps maybe even 10 or 20 years ago, where we were still relatively in the dark about what do strong leaders need to be transformational, we have a much clearer sense now of what those common elements are. So in other words, to sum up, our 9 regional models all have to implement what we call kind of 8 common evidence-based competencies to become a transformational leader, but they have local control and local flexibility based on the needs that are in their district. And we're really excited that this model is taking root in Tennessee.
Excellent. Pat?
I'll push the button this time.
Yeah, you got the button.
I got the button. I got the button this time. So you've heard large school district. You've heard state level. Now come with me to Woodland, Washington. 2,500 students. Every one of our Title IIA funds are used at the beginning of the school year to provide a day and a half of professional learning for the district's 160 teachers. This Title IIA funding establishes the initial and the very essential foundation for my district's efforts to sustain learning growth opportunities. And given the necessities and the constraints of my district's budget, the absence of Title IIA funds would mean the absence of a significant beginning of the year learning opportunity for everyone in my district. I am a full-time coach and a kindergarten and first grade, pre-K, kindergarten and first grade. I serve 377 children and their families. It's a diverse community. It includes 22 teachers, our paraprofessionals, our swing shift and day shift custodians, our lunch staff, our principal, our nurse, and our office staff, and our social worker. As an instructional coach, I know that the practices and the beliefs of my community have a profound impact upon the efficacy and the achievement of everyone within it. Consequently, establishing the high priority start and maintaining it throughout the year via my position is really critical. It empowers all of us to work together in my primary school community to facilitate communication, collaboration, and professional growth. Now, like everybody, I serve in many multiple capacities. I mentor teachers that are new to the profession, and I'm really delighted to tell you that with our district's intentional support for new teachers, we now have a 97% retention rate for those new to our profession during the last 3 years of coming to our district. I also facilitate sustained job-embedded learning. As you've heard, we have much to address. We address the ongoing challenges of student engagement, continued improvement in our practices, curricular use, and ultimately, most importantly, support for every student's academic and social-emotional growth. Every day were you to come with me to my school, you would hear my colleagues and I talking about our Washington State learning standards, and you would see us looking at data. Those are the springboards for the kind of learning conversations that we have on a daily basis. Without question, we understand in my school that it is teaching practice that is the most important driver of increasing our students' achievement, our students' efficacy, and ultimately our students' success. I'm a partner with my principal as an agent of change. I'm always the one asking the challenging questions that require everyone in our learning community to pause, to evaluate, and to ground themselves in research, and more deeply, to continue to reevaluate what are our guiding beliefs. In my school community, we are dedicated to continue the heavy, joyful work of enhancing our practices. We understand that that work's going to depend on trust, and it's going to depend on systemic support. So trust is what we nurture among ourselves, and support is what we provide. Systemic support comes from the district and also from our school leaders. The principals are absolutely mandatory in that systemic support. You will see us throughout the building. I'll be on the playground, I'll be in the lunchroom, I'll be at building leadership team meetings, and I'll be at those just-in-time, spur-of-the-moment conversations where somebody says, what should we do? Those are solution-seeking conversations, which are the springboard for professional learning. These dialogues are precious moments, and they are exquisite examples of instructional coaching that will have immediate and visible impact. because with each dialogue, you can hear an adult use new, more sophisticated language, or you can observe an adult apply a new, more effective strategy. And as each dialogue is successful over time, in my school community, we observe a joyful, more effective, more successful community for everyone, children and adults. So here's the most important question. Where's the evidence of the impact of instructional coaching at Woodland Primary School? My biased opinion is it's quantitative and it's qualitative. It's in the language of growth that I hear when Woodland Primary teachers, collaborating as partners and as teams, will say, I'm wondering if we should continue to. Or they'll question, well, we used to, but now I'm thinking we might. That language, to me, signals a shift in thinking, which is the foundation for a shift in practice. I also think the impact is quantitative. It's in the increasingly sophisticated goals that teachers now set for themselves as part of our state and our district teacher evaluation system. And let's not forget, it's also in the learners' increasing scale scores on our district assessment. But more importantly, it's in the confident willingness of everyone in our learning community to risk, to embrace, and to evaluate change. We have a real sense of urgency in Woodland, Washington. We want to assure that at our primary school, 100% of our children become readers. And we know that we must prepare them for their future, which is going to be quite different from our past. And we know that there's a limited amount of time for us to be part of their lives. Consequently, it is my practice, and it is that of my colleagues, to purposely reflect, to be very clear about our goals, and to never hesitate to soul search. We're always asking, how, why, and most importantly, why not? So it is Title IIA funding that lays the foundation for every year, and it is the district commitment to professional growth that supports all of us. It is, however, the determination of the Woodland Primary School community to improve and the genuine willingness to engage in professional learning that results in this joyful community of increasingly more sophisticated learners and more sophisticated practitioners. I would invite you all to come and join us.
Thank you so much. And just by way of announcement, we have a few more questions for the panelists, and then we intend to open up the floor for questions from the audience, so we'll take your questions momentarily. A next question for either of you on the panel. How do you respond to the perspective from non-educators in particular that professional learning is a waste of time? And so to the critics, the cynics, the naysayers, how do you respond that professional learning is a waste of time? Paul?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent question. And, you know, one way is Stephanie mentioned this earlier, is through better data. So, for example, in Tennessee, we survey all our teachers every year, and we're fortunate to get a majority of them responding, and we're fortunate to take that feedback and then use it to inform, you know, policy and practices. Well, in Tennessee, the latest survey was kind of hot off the press from last year. 78% of our teachers believe that high-quality professional learning impacts and changes their practices for the better. So that's like 4 out of 5 teachers in Tennessee believe in, you know, this notion and the actual reality of high-quality professional learning that they're experiencing. And I think that's powerful, you know, that data to elevate, and it's fortunate today to elevate that, because that's where the rubber hits the road, right? That when teachers feel like they can deprivatize their practice and share through coaching, through PLCs, they have tremendous growth, and we're seeing that in Tennessee. You know, it's still sobering that over half of all teachers have never seen a colleague teach, you know, before. And I think what we're after is this idea of how do we deprivatize best practices, and when we do that, that's a really strong way to change the narrative around professional learning, like other professions have experienced. So I think one is, again, we're fortunate to use that data to trump it and to say teachers not only need it, but they deserve it, as you mentioned before about the biggest impact on student achievement. So that's one way in Tennessee.
Thanks, Paul. Chad, What do you say to the naysayer that professional learning is a waste of time?
Well, a couple of things. So I've had this conversation many of times before. And one, I always like to use the doctor analogy. And by that I mean, if I had to have a heart transplant and I had to have a choice of two doctors, one doctor who was known for his continued research, his continued learning on best practices, or one that just doesn't collaborate with anybody, is very well known in the community as somebody who does not care to learn the new technology, to learn new practices. When I think about those differences, I think we all know what kind of doctor we would want to be with and to have us perform that kind of operation. The same is true of a teacher. When we think about putting our kids in classrooms, do we want to put them with a teacher who is a learner, somebody who has opportunities to continuously grow, continuously learn new strategies, and provide those opportunities for kids in the classroom? Or do we want to have a teacher who has no opportunities for professional growth, no opportunities for professional learning, and is somebody maybe that's been teaching same way for the last 20 years? I think we all know what kind of classroom we want to put our own children in. And so professional learning really matters. And so the second piece, if somebody came to me and said professional learning doesn't work, I have this nice little handout here that is proof. It's proof that the number one thing that we changed in North Kansas City was our approach to professional learning. Nothing else. We didn't change our student population. Right. We didn't change the number of free and reduced lunch students we have. We didn't change the number of ELL students. As a matter of fact, it all grew during the time when we began to see performance increase. So we have the evidence. We have state achievement data, not data that we created within our own school district, but standardized assessments that all students in the state take that prove that it makes a difference.
Pat, would you add anything to the waste of time question?
Sure. Come visit. That's what I'd say. Come visit. Come ask our teachers, ask our principal, ask our district superintendent. Are we making growth? Are our children more sophisticated learners today than they were yesterday? And ask our parents. Ask our parents.
Thank you. Chad, just want to turn attention for just a minute. And, we often hear about Title II funds. The question is, are they being used wisely? The evidence question that we've all talked about earlier. But could you just speak to what your district is doing or your school doing to ensure that these funds are having an impact? So the impact question.
Well, the impact question for us is continuously monitoring. Our student achievement results, first and foremost, that's a really, really big thing for us because we also know that it's a big thing for the community. And we are fortunate to have Title II dollars within our school district that we can allocate and utilize for professional development. So we monitor our results very closely, both within our internal benchmark system that we have, but also with our state achievement results, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is to provide teachers with the resources, the learning that they need in order to be the best that they can be, so that they can help students become the best that they can be. And so we also do survey our teachers quite a bit, but we involve our principals in this as well. We really do believe that our principals are key. They are key to effective change within our school system. So not only do we provide these resources and support for our teachers, but we also provide ongoing professional development for our building principals as well. Because building principals ultimately are the ones that have to be able to support this work. They have to understand this work. They have to understand what kind of professional development their teachers are going through and the kinds of strategies that they're learning so that they can provide quality feedback. So I think over the years with Title II dollars, we've done a much better job of not just providing high quality professional development to our teachers, but involving our leadership in this work as well has been very, very important and critical to the success of our students.
And Paul, same question, just thinking about impact, and we heard from the district level, but from a state perspective, I would imagine it's even more challenging, but welcome to hear from you.
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, we realized a few years ago, we were really excited. In fact, it was right before I joined the state, I think in 2012, having been a principal, that our state board actually passed the Learning Forward professional learning standards and the National Teacher Leader Model Standards. And that seemed like a major accomplishment. And of course, nothing happened. So they were passed and everyone kept going. So in 2013, we realized we had this opportunity to embed both of those sets of standards, especially the professional learning standards, into our state leadership standards and principal evaluation rubric as indicators. So now every principal, it's on the radar in every district about the quality of the professional learning that those principals, the expression what gets monitored gets measured, and it gets monitored gets done, is very true for all of our 1,800 principals, because they have a responsibility as part of their own evaluation to deliver differentiated, high-quality professional learning for their teachers, as measured now by their evaluation. So that's, there are many ways. We have other state mechanisms for measuring professional learning, but I think that was a real important, cohesive policy piece to not just tell principals, oh, by the way, focus on professional learning over here, but we're going to evaluate you completely differently on something over here. And so that cohesion of putting professional learning into an accountability system for principals was really, really important. And so, like I said, we did that in 2013, and we've seen, I think, tremendous growth of our principals around their development and their implementation of professional learning.
Right. Pat, a question for you. Thinking around from the classroom school perspective, why is investing in collaborative time so important?
Because collaborative time empowers us to tap into the wisdom and the knowledge base that is right in our midst. And it also empowers us to challenge the thinking. Our collaborative time is really critical, and of course, we'd always wish for more, but we are thankful for what we have. So that's why I think it's so critical. It lets us challenge our thinking, it lets us grow our thinking, it lets us develop that sense of a professional learning community that we're in this together, and we're all committed to the same goal.
Perfect. Yeah, please, Paul.
I'll add, because I think one piece that we also need to be thinking about, especially for every state now, is around equity and how we're really making sure every student has access to, effective teaching. You may have been going there, but I think, so for example, part of our Transformational Alliance is a focus on districts thinking more critically about hiring leaders of color. Right now in Tennessee, we have about almost 40% of our students are students of color, only about 18% of our leaders are leaders of color. So we have this gap. And so this is a real important piece, because we know leaders of color hire more teachers of color, and all students benefit in schools that have a more diverse faculty. So that's been another piece of our Transformational Alliance, is how we put that on the radar and how we're monitoring and how we're incentivizing districts to think deeply about this notion of diversifying the workforce that we need to be focused on. And so that's just another piece I think that's important when we're talking about not just monitoring dollars, but really the mindset shifts that are needed to get to that notion of equitable outcomes.
So before we open it up to the floor and Q&A, just want to take the equity question to the other panelists, and Paul, give you a chance to weigh in as well as part of this last question. Why is professional learning an equity issue? We hear a lot about equity. Paul, you talked about it from the hiring perspective, but why is professional learning an equity issue from your perspective? Chad?
As we think about equity and we think about professional development, I really do believe that we have to be comfortable in giving more to those communities throughout our country that have received less. And if we want our urban schools and students in our urban communities to be able to compete with not just the rest of the United States, but throughout the world, if we want to provide them with those opportunities, we have to provide them with the very best educators that we can. And this is certainly an equity issue in that we have to continue to invest in areas and communities of our school districts, of our country, so that we can dramatically increase the quality of teachers in some of our urban communities, so that they can provide students with the very best learning experiences that's going to help support them in becoming the very best that they can be.
Pat?
I would add that nobody wants to have a classroom that is less than. So engaging in professional learning as a collaborative team helps us to make sure that we have no classrooms that are less than, because we're tapping in to the wonderful ideas and the support of each other. And I think that is a real critical equity consideration.
Paul, you get the last word.
Yeah, I didn't mean to jump the gun on you there, Alan.
It's all right.
It's passionate. Alan knows, too, we've put out what we call an equity playbook in Tennessee for leaders at different levels. And we're actually arguing this equity hits all 146 of our districts, right? It's not a rural issue, it's not an urban issue, but it is this piece of, especially around the teachers and leaders, how are we thinking more deeply about diversifying? And very practically, what we know is that especially teachers of color are retained at higher rates when they experience high-quality professional learning earlier in their careers and mentoring as a form of professional learning. So that piece alone is also kind of a call to action around high-quality professional learning and mentoring if we're serious about keeping teachers, especially teachers of color, in the classroom and retaining them longer. We do that through professional learning especially, and I think that's an important piece for the reason why we need this as well. So just
Great.
give a practical example.
Thank you. A round of applause for our panelists before we go to the next session. Thank you, and I'd like to ask Stephanie, if you would, to come up for the open Q&A portion. We'll just change spots. How's that? Okay, as an opportunity to engage the audience, would like to hear from you with respect to questions you may have for our panelists. If you would, stand, tell us who you are and where you're from before you're phrasing your question.
Yes, hello, good morning, or good afternoon. My name is Dr. Donna Banks. I'm here actually, located right here from Florida State University. I have a question to the panel, particularly I think Chad and Mr. Fleming may be able to speak to this. Some of my research deals with access of quality teachers and quality instruction for children of color and children that are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. So I'm interested in knowing, particularly with the research and what you've done in your district, how are you navigating the necessary funds to those children of color or children from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to ensure that we're not just equally distributing the Title II funds, but also that they're equitably distributed to those that are the most needy?
So I just want to repeat the question for the benefit of our viewing audience. And as I understood it, it was around how are we going about differentiating the distribution of funds to make sure that they're getting where they need to be with those children or students who have the greatest needs. Did I catch that right? Okay.
That's a great question. And so one of the things that we have done throughout the past several years is not just be able to allocate our Title II dollars to some of our areas in our community that need additional support, where we saw students underperforming, or some of our schools that have lots of students of color in that community, but we've also reallocated our district resources as well. There used to be a time when we would just distribute evenly across the board with all of our funds. But especially over the last couple of years, we have invested very heavily into some different aspects in different schools within our community. And one example, a great example, is a Wynwood Elementary School. Had about 80% poverty, 85% poverty, about 50% diverse, and they were one of the lowest performing schools in the state of Missouri. They were on the priority list, priority schools with No Child Left Behind. And so we had to go through a lot of changes in that building, but we invested heavily in professional development. We didn't buy new resources, we didn't buy new textbooks, we didn't buy new programs. We invested heavily in our teachers. And 2 or 3 years later, they were able to be removed from the priority list, but now perform at or above the state in all areas of every state assessment. And so we were able to do that because we reallocated resources within our department budget, within our district, to support those teachers. And really the bottom line was us increasing the quality of teachers and leadership over time at Wynwood. And we saw some tremendous gains and still see so much success within that school. And we have continued to repeat that pattern with other schools. And that's a structure that we've put in place as a district, even just this year, is that we are working with some of our schools much more closely than we have in the past. And by closely, I mean in a role of support, but also in a role of funding and providing them with more resources and support than some of our other schools that don't necessarily show the need for it.
Paul?
Yeah, again, thank you for the question. I think from the state level, we come at it through two ways. One, through funding. So we actually, with Title II and state dollars, are working with districts who are willing and want to try innovative approaches for both the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. And I think that's we've started that this year, and we're looking forward to seeing what those districts are starting to produce around being innovative and thinking differently. The other lever is around policy. So we have over 40 teacher preparation programs in the state. One of the measures they're held accountable for is the percentage of candidates who are diverse, who are being placed into districts. And I believe that's another opportunity, because then it's on the radar of these higher ed institutions in a good way to incentivize and be more intentional about the recruitment and the placement into districts around candidates, diverse candidates.
Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. Thank you for your time. I'm Deborah Lane. I'm the Director of Professional Learning at Alexandria City Schools. And we're on our third superintendent in 3 years. And so each year, some of the goals around Title II change. And I'm curious from a state perspective how we can really continue to work with our superintendents around understanding of Title II funds and keeping the main thing.
So, Paul, just repeat the question for the benefit of the audience.
Yeah, thank you for the question. The question around turnover, especially at the district leader level around superintendents, which I think sometimes, unfortunately, all too common, and how do we keep Title IIA on the radar and keeping it a priority, I believe was the question, right? Right, and certainly from the state level, I mean, part of it was this idea and what we were able to do with the 3% set aside, for example. This idea of coming together, and I think to back up, it would say what is both the state and district strategic plan that emphasizes teacher development and leader development, because those two things we believe in Tennessee have to be on every district's plan and certainly in the state plan, which then leads to this idea of, okay, if that's true, how are you using this really great opportunity with Title IIA to do it? In Tennessee, we've also done that through teacher leadership. So we actually have a network. I'm fortunate to lead that as well. Have a great job, I'll say that, with over half of our districts creating teacher leader models using the Title IIA funds to help pay for those stipends and those roles. I don't think I've yet to meet a superintendent who is against teacher leadership, right? So I think there's another opportunity to say, how do you help superintendents understand the value of teachers who want to have an impact in their school without leaving the classroom? And teacher leadership is a big vehicle to do that, and you can do that through Title IIA. So I think it's this idea of this alignment, right? Where do you want to go as a district? What's in your strategic plan? And then saying, how do you use these funds? Because I think the big mistake, when we see this in Tennessee, and this is around class size reduction that sometimes is still used at the expense of everything else, is letting the funding drive the planning as opposed to the planning driving the funding. And that sounds simple, but it's often done, in a mistaken way, that the funding drives the planning in a district, and really trying to switch that lens is important. So hopefully those are some concrete examples.
Thank you, Paul. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Naomi Norman. I am the Assistant Superintendent of Washington Intermediate School District in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I also serve as the Vice Chair in our State Literacy Commission. So we are thinking very intentionally, both locally and statewide, about how professional learning is occurring. We heard an amazing story at the building level, the district level, and the state
So, Pat? Yep. You look like you're eager to jump in at the bit. So Stephanie,
I just want to share, in Southwest Washington, our Educational Service District brings together instructional coaches, instructional leaders, and nurtures that growth in mentoring. So there's one example of a real systemic, very purposeful use.
Stephanie? Yeah.
Okay. It went red, so I thought that meant don't talk. A couple of things, okay? First one is that creating an advocate for professional learning according to the new definition in your State Department. So like Paul talked about, that whenever we talk about what we mean in terms of professional learning, that we're talking about professional learning that in your state has the standards, aligns to the standards, and in addition to that, now meets the definition, okay? And then making sure that across your network, that all of your all of your members become advocates for professional learning that only meets the definition. Like when you experience poor professional learning, you need to call it out. And you need to say, it's got to change. So people have to learn to find their voice around that. And then the third thing, building on what Pat said, is truly the power of convening people across the state to have these important conversations about how can we have more consistent application. In Missouri, Chad's district was held up because the commissioner still has an award for professional learning. So every year, districts nominate what they're doing, and the commissioner acknowledges and presents, these are examples of great professional learning that are having impact on students. So affecting it that way, you can do the award and recognition, and also states have the authority now to determine whether they want to give the money to the districts according to the plan that the district submits. So states can now establish new criteria for awarding their Title II dollars to the districts. So states can maybe begin to pull, to set higher standards for how they expect to see Title II dollars spent, as well as how they will evaluate whether the districts actually fulfilled the commitments they made in their plan. So there's a few different angles, and if you want more, we can talk more.
Okay. One more question. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you all for being here. This is great. I'm Leslie Muldoon. I'm from Panelists here to see Center Point. And I'm curious, Stephanie, in your opening about the purpose of using data to inform professional development, and try to talk about how you use data to see how students are doing. So I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about how you're using data and what data you need to bring to the table to have a full picture of how teachers are progressing throughout the year and how children are.
Okay. Around the data piece and obviously evidence of impact, Paul, we'll start with you.
Sure. Again, thank you for the question, and I'll give a lot of examples, but I think I'll just give one in the interest of time. So, as Stephanie mentioned, we're trying to be much more intentional with districts around the types of professional learning and the evidence base that they are using, and also the alignment. So I mentioned this earlier to the other question about Alexandria. So we have a statewide goal, which many of our districts share, of getting, almost 80% of our third graders reading on grade level in a few years, 2025 to be exact. The problem is we have only a third of our third graders are reading at grade level right now. So that data element and that goal is really important. So when we talk to districts about their professional learning expenditures, that has to be in the conversation about what are you doing in your pre-K to grade 2 specifically to move and to help move this number towards the statewide goal, right? In this part of their accountability plan as well. So there's a cohesion. So the conversation used to be, what does your professional learning programs look like? Now we're talking about what is your system, your professional learning system, coming at it to all reach this one goal, for example, that's based on data statewide. And I think that's a big significant shift in how we're using data to help districts think about being more strategic in their planning to now reach these really strong identifiable goals like literacy for all third graders, right? Which we all want, we all need, and to do it. So that's where the shift has really happened in Tennessee. So thanks.
Stephanie, on the data piece? Okay.
So the other piece of data that we collect and really look at pretty frequently has a lot to do with building leadership and central office leadership and their role in this. Part of what we want to see when we have professional development experiences for our teachers is evidence that the strategies or the tools are actually being applied in the classroom. And I think sometimes that's where we don't always, or in the past haven't always done a great job. So it's really, really important that when we provide professional development experiences, that our leaders have been involved in the process, that they're knowledgeable of what to look for. Our central office leadership is knowledgeable and understands what to look for. And then it's shifting that role of the building principal to spend a significant amount of time in classrooms. And also our central office leadership spending a significant amount of time in classrooms as well, to get a sense of, to collect data on the practices that are happening in classrooms, so that when we do watch this over a period of time, we have qualitative data to say and to understand the level of implementation of the practices learned from professional development, and also some of the achievement results, to look at that side by side so that we can really have a conversation about how well we are doing as an organization in terms of actually seeing these professional development experiences make a difference in the lives of our kids.
Last word, Stephanie.
So probably a decade ago, maybe more, all we ever collected data about during professional learning was whether people were satisfied. And actually, sometimes we did ask, what did you learn, okay? And what we're challenged to do today, and what we have the technology to be able to do today, which is so exciting, is to get to the higher levels of impact, so we can collect data about whether teachers have indeed changed their practice, whether leaders have changed their practice, and then we can use that data to inform whether student achievement is occurring as well. And so I challenge all of us who are in this field to think about, how are we going to collect data on those 2 points? What are the different kinds of data that we can use to demonstrate adults are changing, and as a result, students are benefiting?
Great. Thank you all so much for being here today. I want to turn to Melinda for some closing remarks.
I would love to just give a round of applause to all of our fabulous speakers today. So I'll say I'm the person in the front row that's just going, yes! This was a great panel. We are so appreciative to all of you who traveled so far to share your stories. I will tell you that while all of these folks sitting here are rock stars in their communities, there are rock stars like this doing professional learning across this whole country. And so one of the things that, while we appreciate so much the ideas, the examples, the data that you shared today, I have a couple of calls to action for people in this room and for people online. First of all, for those of you joining us from the education community, and we heard a couple of you, we challenge you and encourage you and say, please reach out to your members of Congress and invite them to come and visit your schools and your districts and see professional learning. And they don't just need to sit, they can be part of a collaborative learning team and understand what real professional learning looks like today. So number one, reach out. They will come, whether it's the member or their key staff on these issues. The more they can see and talk about and paint that picture of what professional learning is, the better impact that they're going to have in creating legislation that supports this and the funding to back it up. For those of you joining us from House and Senate offices, I started this with a thank you. I will say it again. We appreciate in a really busy time that you're here with us hearing about professional learning and the importance of teachers and leaders in schools. In my opinion, this is the critical issue for the future of this country, and the support that you and your bosses can provide to these issues is critical. Take our members up on these offers to come visit schools. Come in and see it for yourself. And if somebody doesn't call you an offer, call me at Learning Forward, and I will find you a member in your district or your state that would love to host you and show you what fabulous professional learning is and should be. And then finally, for everyone online and in this room, what we know is that evidence is critical. And we, as Learning Forward, have been working with our members over the last couple of years to really talk about this idea of building evidence in from the beginning. You know, I was talking to some principals, and I said, that was an amazing idea. How could you tell that it worked? And they said, well, we didn't know it was an amazing idea until we were all the way into it. And then it's hard to go back and say, but here's where we've traveled on this journey. So one thing I would say to all of you that are planning professional learning, teachers, coaches, district leadership, state leadership, even if you don't know if it's going to be a great idea to start, do the measures at the beginning of any great new idea that you have, so that then when it is the great idea that you thought it would be, you can say, and here's how I know. That evidence is really critical, and we need the educators in this country who are doing great work to be able to show and tell their stories of this great work, because that's what's going to make Title II and other education programs that are so critical to our future continue and grow. So thank you to all of you for coming today. Thank you again to all of you that traveled from so far to join us. We loved being with all of you who came to join us in the room and online, and we continue to tell the stories and invite you to join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you. Thank you.
Different levels represented.